I am going to issue our notification of intent to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Donald Trump did something almost no other modern president would have when he withdrew the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Critics of TPP like Bernie Sanders, Robert Reich, and Noam Chomsky have pointed out, I think accurately, that the proposed trade deal was designed as a massive handout to multinational corporations at the expense of everyday working people.
These are investor right agreements. There's a reason why they're kept secret from the public.
Barrack Obama ended a fruitless and harmful period of severe hostility towards Cuba by normalizing trade relations. He took out Osama bin Laden and put a stop to waterboarding, which is considered to be torture under international law. Think what you will of George W. Bush, he is certainly not a man of hate.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
He was ridiculed when he said that being called a racist was one of the low points of his presidency.
I resent it. It's not true. And it was one of the most disgusting moments of my presidency.
But I think it reflects a genuine distaste for prejudice and bigotry. After all, even though it was his administration that began the war on terror, he was always clear to distinguish terrorism from Islam.
Our nation is waging a war on a radical network of terrorists, not on a religion.
Do we all worship the same God, Christian and Muslim?
I think we do.
His teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah.
Last week I posted a video talking about the ugly side of every president in history. Here I'm going to do the reverse. While every president has had flaws, none has been a pure villain. Although, to be honest, some are pretty close.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
You're going to be proud of your president.
Tear down this wall.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
The leader of Al-Qaeda.
Read my lips.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
George Washington defined what it means to be the President of the United States. He successfully led the American Revolution to victory as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, and was dedicated to Enlightenment principles of reason and rationality. He was a champion of Republican values, and despite owning slaves during his lifetime, he was the only prominent founding father to free all of them upon his death. John Adams never owned slaves and considered the practice abhorrent. Historians have noted him as a clear, free thinker, often disagreeing with his own political party. And he certainly was a fine father, as his son John Quincy grew up to be one of the best presidents of all time. With the Louisiana Purchase, Thomas Jefferson doubled the territory of his country overnight. He drafted the Declaration of Independence and was a leading proponent of one of America's most important values, secularism. His wall of separation between church and state protects religious minorities from discrimination, government from being corrupted by dogmatic values, and religion from being corrupted by politics. James Madison drafted the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. Enough said. Unlike many founding fathers, James Monroe was a strong supporter of the French Revolution and thus the spread of Republican values. As ambassador to France, he secured the release of Thomas Paine, another international friend of liberty, who had been arrested for his opposition to the brutal execution of the deposed King of France. John Quincy Adams negotiated the end of the foolish War of 1812, paid off much of the national debt, and promoted economic modernization and education. He was a leading opponent of slavery and suggested that if a civil war were to break out, the president could end slavery by decree by using his war powers. That just might be where Lincoln got the idea for the Emancipation Proclamation. Andrew Jackson was perhaps the only president in history brave enough to take on the banks. His enemies accused him of class warfare, which basically means fighting for the poor and weak against the rich and powerful. Believe it or not, Martin Van Buren's presidency marked real victory for diversity. He was the first president whose ancestry was not English. In fact, he remains to this day the only president in history who spoke English as a second language, and his supporters were quite diverse for the time. Van Buren rejected the admission of Texas into the Union on the grounds that it would cause war with Mexico. He turned out to be right. Prior to being elected president and promptly dying, William Henry Harrison found a way of spreading American values through Latin America that didn't involve the overthrow of democratically elected leaders. He urged the legendary Latin American revolutionary Simón Bolívar to adopt democratic policies. It didn't exactly take, but it was worth a shot. Gotta be honest, John Tyler's a tough one. But when he retired from the House of Representatives, he endorsed his former opponent for the seat. That's a pretty classy move. It's generally agreed that Polk came through on his campaign promises. One of them was that he would not seek re-election after one successful term. Sure enough, that's exactly what he did. Despite being a slave owner himself, Zachary Taylor did not push for the expansion of slavery. Millard Fillmore more or less lived the American dream. He had no formal schooling as a child and was born in a log cabin. Despite this, he rose to become President of the United States, and that's worth some admiration. Franklin Pierce, like most of the pre-Civil War presidents, is largely remembered as a total failure. But in that incredibly polarizing climate, few, if any, could really have gotten much of anything good done. Pierce was known to be a warm person and a skilled politician. He tried to be a unifier. His failures were quite likely unavoidable consequences of his time. Buchanan is rightly remembered for his great devotion to the law. Lincoln is quite often ranked as the greatest president in American history, and for good reason. He saw the country through its most turbulent time, winning the Civil War. Although he did not do it alone, he oversaw the end of slavery. He cleverly pitted his enemies against each other, and his Gettysburg Address is one of the most beautiful political speeches in history. Andrew Johnson was a strict constitutionalist. Ulysses S. Grant did much to stop the KKK's reign of terror, promote the 15th Amendment, seat black state legislators in southern states, and make peace with Native American tribes. Hayes contributed greatly to the modernization of the American bureaucracy, installing a merit-based appointment process, weeding out corruption in the postal service, and issuing an executive order that made it illegal for federal office holders to be forced to participate in party politics. If he was never assassinated, Garfield likely would have continued the civil service reforms initiated by Hayes. He recognized that blacks were being denied their civil rights, wanted to extend public education to blacks, and appointed several black leaders like Frederick Douglass to powerful positions in government. Like few politicians of his time, Chester A. Arthur avoided scandal and corruption, and was known to be true to his word. Grover Cleveland also opposed political corruption as well as imperialism. Benjamin Harrison attempted to secure federal education funding and voting rights enforcement for black Americans. McKinley's presidency marked rapid economic growth and a decisive victory in the Spanish-American War. Teddy Roosevelt was a great defender of conservationism, establishing numerous national parks. He broke up corporate monopolies, supported labor unions, and pressed Congress to pass the Pure Food and Drug Act, which banned impure or falsely labeled consumables. Taft actually broke up more monopolies than Roosevelt, and the widely believed story that he was so fat he got stuck in a White House bathtub, well, unfortunately, that's not true. Woodrow Wilson is best known for promoting global democracy and establishing the League of Nations, the predecessor of the UN. He innovated a regulatory approach to breaking up monopolies. He avoided fighting in World War I until Germans sunk American ships. Although the US had played a relatively small role in the war, Wilson played a pivotal role in the Paris Peace Conference. Harding supported equal political rights for blacks, spoke out against lynching, and released political prisoners, like socialist leader Eugene Debs, who was imprisoned by Wilson for speaking out against the war. Coolidge called for the federal criminalization of lynching and granted U.S. citizenship to all Native Americans living on reservations. Herbert Hoover wanted to focus on eliminating waste in government institutions, but was instead forced to spend his presidency dealing with the Great Depression. He attempted to combat it with large-scale public works projects like the Hoover Dam. FDR actually used similar tactics quite successfully. FDR saw the United States through a period of economic disaster and global war, but the most crucial aspect of his legacy was the New Deal. He created Social Security and reformed the financial system to prevent future collapse. Indeed, the US did not experience another serious financial crisis until the critical aspects of his financial reforms, like the Glass-Steagall Act, were dismantled. Truman prioritized civil rights. He integrated the military and federal agencies, and he proposed the creation of federal offices to protect voting rights and fair employment practices. Eisenhower created NASA and warned the country of the dangers of the military-industrial complex.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Kennedy took responsibility for the Bay of Pigs, even though it was actually the previous administration that planned it. He negotiated a test ban treaty, championed Medicare, and inspired America to go to the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
LBJ worked against great opposition to get the Civil Rights Bill passed into law. He had to convince Republicans to vote for the bill, and successfully convinced their leader, Everett Dirksen, to make it happen. Nixon enforced the integration of Southern schools, ended the war in Vietnam, and created the EPA. Ford didn't get much done in his short time in office, but his famous clumsiness fueled Chevy Chase's career on SNL, and that show is still really good. Carter pardoned Vietnam draft dodgers, built the Departments of Education and Energy, and created a lasting peace between Egypt and Israel. Since leaving office, he's continued to do incredible work, criticizing the use of drones, the Iraq War, and Guantanamo Bay, supporting Habitat for Humanity, and practically eliminating the guinea worm disease. Ronald Reagan is a legend among Republicans, but he was not totally uncompromising in his right-wing policy. He actually raised taxes 11 times. Although often ridiculed for his vision thing, quote, was Bush's practical approach to politics really such a bad thing? Unlike any other American president, George H.W. Bush was more concerned with dealing with the complex problems he had to deal with than inundating the public with propaganda. Clinton oversaw massive growth in the US economy, and at least for his first term, was smart enough to have Robert Reich working for him as Secretary of Labor. I've already given W some credit for his unbigoted disposition. He also just generally seems to be an affable guy. His gaffes are ridiculously funny even to this day, and since leaving office he started painting people he met as president. That's pretty adorable. While a little too obsessed with compromise and bipartisanship for my taste, it's a small tragedy that history will almost certainly remember Obama first and foremost as being the first black president. Sure, that sends a strong and important message to children of color, but Obama did a lot of truly great things for the country. Even if repealed, the legacy of Obamacare will make it near impossible for health insurance companies to be allowed to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions in the future. Obama was the first president to openly support gay rights, and he ended Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He oversaw the end of the Great Recession, and his presidency marks the end of the fruitless war in Iraq and a partial but significant withdrawal from Afghanistan. In his rhetoric, Trump is amongst the most populist presidents in US history. If he focuses his efforts on actually improving the lives of poor and middle-class people, rather than protecting corporations and billionaires like himself, he'll be remembered as an incredible and brave reformer. I have my doubts, but he did block TPP. If he gives us more of that and knocks it off with the ridiculous wall and the Muslim ban, he'll make a believer out of me. Thanks for watching this video. Shout out to Chad Doyle for suggesting it. If you guys have a topic that you'd like to see me cover or a question that you'd like me to answer, be sure to post your suggestions in the comments down below. If you want to make me a happy man, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, share this video, and have vigorous debates in the comments down below.